to be learning about fairy tales this week. So, what is a fairy tale? It is a subgenre of folklore which comes from oral storytelling tradition and includes stories like Paul Bunyan, Johnny Appleseed, The Road to El Dorado, Atlantis, Beauty and the Beast, Cinderella, all of those stories that we have grown up with. The great thing about fairy tales is that they do not have to be about fairies. In fact, there are very few stories that involve fairies. And when oral tales are written down, they become part of the literary collection and are no longer considered folklore. Jack Zipes' definition of a fairy tale is based off of Tismar's definition of a fairy tale, and it is 1. It distinguishes itself from the oral folk tale insofar as it is written by a single identifiable author. And 2. It is thus synthetic, artificial, and elaborate, meaning it is not based on real events. Marcia Lane's definition of a fairy tale is a little different, and she says, "My own definition of fairy tale goes something like this. A fairy tale is a story, literary or folk, that has a sense of the numinous, the feeling or sensation of the supernatural or mysterious. But, and this is crucial, it is a story that happens in the past tense, and a story that is not tied to any specifics. If it happens at the beginning of the world, then it is a myth. A story that names a specific real person is a legend, even if it contains a magical occurrence. And a story that happens in the future is a fantasy. Fairy tales are sometimes spiritual, but never religious." That end part is a little foggy because the Grimms changed their fairy tales to be more religious. So they would have good Christian heroes up against evil representative of the devil type characters such as the evil witch. So, if they don't have anything to do with fairies, why do we call them fairy tales? Because in 1690 France, in the French salons, women wrote fairy tales, and they called them contes de fées, which is translated into fairy tales. Why they decided to do it, I don't know. But they did, and it stuck. And here we are. The timeline for fairy tales, we have around 100 to 200 AD. The first fairy tale, at least it is considered by scholars, Cupid and Psyche, which is similar to the Beauty and the Beast. At around 850 to 860 in China, we have the first known literary version of Cinderella, meaning it was the first written account of Cinderella. First one. I would have personally liked to have seen that in the Disney version, but that's just me. Circa 1500, 1001 Arabian Nights. This is your magic lamp, genie, flying carpet, Aladdin, all of that good stuff right here in 1500. That is so long ago, and yet they were thinking about flying carpets. It's great. 1690 to 1710 in France, the French salons. Women were writing fairy tales, and they became popular. So much so that in 1697, in France again, the Mother Goose tales were published. Humpty Dumpty, the old woman who lived in a shoe, all of that published 1697. In 1812 and 1815 Germany, the Grimm brothers published their childhood and household tales. Red Riding Hood, Cinderella, Snow White, half of the fairy tales that we know and love, but all thanks to these two men. The other half of the fairy tales that we know and love were created by Hans Christian Andersen in 1835, Denmark, and they were published in his Fairy Tales for Children. 1902, Great Britain. I know it says great, but it's Great Britain. So sorry. Um, Peter Pan made his first appearance in The Little White Bird. There's a book that comes out later, but his very first appearance ever on the literary scene is in 1902. In 1937, in the United States, Walt Disney's Snow White and the Seven Dwarfs is released, and the skies opened up and light came down and everybody went, oh, because our world was changed forever because of this very great man. My whole life would have been changed had I not seen these movies. I don't know about you, but that's just me. In 2001, the United States, Shrek turns fairy tales on its head. The ogre, which is usually the villain, turns into the hero. Madness ensues. It's awesome. And this leads us to 2007. In the United Kingdom, J.K. Rowling publishes The Tales of Beedle the Bard. And this intertwines a magical, fictional world with the reality, and it brings in a book that is firmly grounded in the wizarding world of Harry Potter, and it brings it to the real world, and we can share these same fairy tales with our children in time to come. Hans Christian Andersen, father of so many fairy tales, it's insane. But you see him in his little oval portrait, and next to him, on the top, we have the Little Mermaid. This is the statue that is in Denmark, and made after the story and way before the very familiar face you see below it, and that is Ariel, the Disney's Little Mermaid. Jacob and Wilhelm Grimm. Wilhelm is the one sitting down in the picture, and Jacob is the one standing up. And next to them, you see one of their famous characters, Little Red Riding Hood, in her adorable dress with the basket. So cute, right? Today, we have fairy tales that we've twisted and manipulated into something that is entertaining and more up to date. And we did that through books, we've done it through television shows and movies. So, for books, like I said before, The Tales of Beedle the Bard by J.K. Rowling. It's new fairy tales, not a retelling of anything. They're all original fairy tales that we get to pass down to our children, and it has stories like The Wizard and the Hopping Pot, The Fountain of Fair Fortune, The Warlock's Hairy Heart, Babbity Rabbity and Her Cackling Stump, and of course, The Tale of the Three Brothers, which is what was said in the movie, which was read in the movie, and is a part of the seventh and final Harry Potter book. For movies, Shrek made a giant footprint and continued from its first movie on to its fourth movie, the final Shrek movie, or at least we hope so. And you get to know all of these unusual characters. Shrek turns the fairy tale world upside down by being an unusual hero, and he's paired with a just as unusual love, the not so pretty Fiona. She's not ugly, but she's not the typical princess either. And then you have the not so mighty steed, Donkey, and then you have the adorable and slightly annoying Puss in Boots, followed by the villains that aren't typical villains either. You have Lord Farquaad, very short man, and you have an equally short man, Rumpelstiltskin. They like short villains. On TV, we have a new show. It first aired last year, called Once Upon a Time, and it has fairy tale characters in the real world. So you have the main character, Emma, the blonde with the jacket, and she comes to Storybrooke, brought there by her son, Henry, because he was adopted by the evil queen. And Henry believes that everybody in Storybrooke is a fairy tale character, and they just don't know it. And Emma is there to break their curse and set them free and send them back to their fairyland world. In the middle, down at the bottom in the middle, we have Snow White. And as the way she is presented in Storybrooke. And next to her, we have her husband, Prince Charming, as he is presented in the fairy tale land. And next to him, we have the evil queen, Regina, adopted mother to Henry, and mayor of Storybrooke. And Emma and Regina have a very long and complicated conflict over Henry, and not just Henry, but the town itself. It's worth checking out. It's a twist on a lot of Disney fairy tales. It has characters such as Captain Hook, the genie, Cinderella, Belle, Aladdin, all of those in this show, and it's really worth checking out. Then you have Grimm on TV, also aired last year. Something about fairy tales last year. I have no idea what's going on with that. But Grimm takes a very grim look at the Grimm fairy tales. And it is a detective and fantasy type story with fairy tale creatures who are more like horror creatures than anything else, but they're very dark, and they have this special ability to conceal their true identity and live amongst normal people. And you can see 3 of them in their true forms here. So you have Nick, who is the main character down on the bottom in the corner, and he is able to see the true forms of these creatures, whether they want to be seen or not. Next to him, you have one of the fairy tale creatures, the big bad wolf, Monroe, in his human form, and he helps Nick with the creatures. At the top, you have Hank and Juliet. Hank is Nick's partner, and they're both cops. He's normal. Nothing special about him. And Juliet is also normal, his fiance. And then under them, you have Captain Reynard, who may or may not be an enemy. And next to him, you have a picture of a Hexenbeast, or the evil witch. And below, you have 2 pictures of fairy tale creatures as the way Nick can see them. In this show, Grimm is another term for a hunter of these fairy tale creatures. He hunts the bad creatures. There are good and there are bad, but he hunts the bad, and it's a very interesting twist on the Grimm stories. So, now that we've gone over fairy tales and modern fairy tales and authors, I hope you're more interested in fairy tales in general. Thank you. Hello. We are going to be learning about fairy tales this week. So, what is a fairy tale? It is a subgenre